What is up, you guys? Welcome back. Thank you for joining me today. I am talking about, it's not exactly an ego story, really. It's more of like the breeding grounds for our ego story. And it's this illusion that we are separate from the world, that we are abandoned, that we will never be provided for, and that leads us into a big state of fear. It's a huge fear story, and that is the breeding grounds from which all other ego stories arise. This is why our ego exists. It exists to protect us because we are under the illusion that we are separate and we're not provided for. So I get a little philosophical. If that is your jam, please stick around for this episode. I think you'll like it. We talk about how it's actually not possible for us to ever be separate, no matter how you slice the situation. This is a 2-part series. Today, I am talking about gratitude, synchronicities, and how we start chasing, grasping, and hoarding, and some antidotes for those things if you're struggling with it. Next week, I'm talking about how this shows up sort of in our relationships and in our day-to-day. So, without further ado, welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, welcome back. Thank you for joining me here for another episode. I'm thankful to have you here with me today. I feel like I say hello the same way every single time. I never know how to change it up. And here's something that nobody ever tells you when you start a podcast or a YouTube channel is that saying hello and goodbye is so awkward and you never know how to do it. You never know how to end things. Anyway, if you are thinking about starting a podcast or a YouTube channel or creating videos or content, just know that saying hello and goodbye is so awkward. It's so awkward. That's not what we're here. I digress. Today we're talking about an ego story. It's not actually so much an ego story. It's more of where the ego comes from, where it's born out of. And when I say ego, really what I mean is this inflated sense of self, right? I feel like I haven't defined that in a while. And so when I say ego, when I say your ego story, it's this part of yourself that sees yourself as it's self-protective, it's self-important, and it blocks you from your highest self, right? It thinks it already knows, so it's closed off to new information. It feels like it has to overly protect yourself from things that are actually not a threat, right? That's the type of ego that I'm talking about. So today I'm talking about fear and separation, which is sort of the underlying emotions that go on that lead you into more ego stories. And it's not exactly always readily apparent. Fear and separation is why the ego exists. The unhealthy, inflated sense of self exists. So today I'm talking all about fear and separation, and then what happens when we operate out of fear and separation and how it shows up. And then this week is also going to be another bonus week type episode. So today I am talking about some ways that it shows up for us in regular, practical, everyday life. And then next week, I'm talking about how fear and separation, like when that goes kind of under the surface and when we operate out of that environment, how it shows up in our relationships and what patterns of behavior kind of, come to the surface when we're doing that in our relationships. So when we come into this world, it's almost like all of a sudden we become acutely aware of our separation and our individuality. I'm a different person from you. This is what allows me to live my own life on my own terms, making my own decisions, and become the author of my own story. I have independent thoughts, experiences, dreams, and goals than anyone else in the world. And in this life, I'd say that this is our most instinctive, I don't want to say natural state, but it is sort of where we default to. This is the lens that most of us see the world. Now, sometimes we can actually have an experience that lifts this veil of separation. Sometimes this happens with psychedelics. This can happen by listening to Alan Watts, which, if you're not familiar with Alan Watts, I highly recommend getting familiar with his material. It's mind-bending. It will turn your world upside down when you really get he just has a way of explaining things that is so good and so clear. But usually when we talk in spiritual terms, it gets a little fuzzy, right? So check out Alan Watts. He has a ton of audio programs on Audible, or you can go on YouTube. There's lots of different places you can find them, but check out Alan Watts. So sometimes this veil of separation is lifted when we meditate, when we get really deep meditation, or for near-death experiences. Some people can have this awakening, or some life-altering event, or some spiritual experience, or something that changes you to the core. This is the realization that we are all one. And we're like droplets of water on an ocean. And even in our separation, we can see the profound truth that we can't actually be separated from other people and from our environment, right? I can't be me without you being you. In so many ways, everyone around you helps shape who you are, even the people that you hate. So for example, say I have a really absent mother in my childhood, and I resolved to make myself a better parent. I'm going to be caring. I'm going to be present. And I'm going to do everything opposite from what my mother did. And for better or worse, I have to recognize that my mother then, the mother that was absent, this hypothetical mother that I'm talking about, the mother that was absent gave me this baseline on which to change. She gave me something to, make myself out of. She put that foundation there so that I could build something different. Put another way, I define everything through my own experience. And as the observer, I get to place meaning on everything around me, right? I'm the one that differentiates the grass from the tree, from the leaves. And without me, what would the separation be? Without me defining that, how could you separate all of those things? Who's to say that it's not all one thing? Another way to look at this is like if I eat an apple or drink a glass of water, at which point does that apple or glass of water stop being the apple or glass of water and start being me? It's indivisible, and we can't separate it. When we really get down to it, that's the profound truth in all of this. And when you really get this, when you really understand this down to your core, you start to realize that whatever I do to someone else, I actually do to myself. If I verbally berate someone or mistreat someone or even gossip about someone, because of this inseparability, I'm really just doing it to myself. And if that doesn't really jive with you, if you don't really get that, just think about what biologically happens to you when you go on the offense, or when you even go on the defense, when you start mistreating others. When you get to that point where you're survival state, or you're retracting into that fear and separation, you're the one that gets the rush of hormones. You're the one that goes into fight or flight. You're in survival mode and you get defensive. And we know that survival mode or stress or any version of that is anti-creativity. And when you're in that state, that's the point at which you start reacting from subconscious programming rather than consciously creating the life that you want to live. And so all that to say that everything is connected. Everything exists in relationship to each other. This is our most natural state, in the way that this is the baseline. This is where we come back to. When you really just, think about these things and you lift the veil from which we've been looking through, that lens of fear and separation, this is the state that we come back to. This is where we can't separate ourselves from other people or from our environment, but it's just clouded by this perception of our ego. Our ego just keeps that cloud in front of our eyes, or in front of our awareness, I should say. And it's just like when we come into this world and inhabit this body, we sort of just forget this eternal truth. And so I sort of think that all spiritual endeavors, when you go embark on all these spiritual, you start to read these spiritual books, you start to get spiritual, it's really just this process of trying to remember where we came from. We just forget, and it's funny because even though I know intellectually this truth, I still forget from time to time. Otherwise, why would I get angry? Why would I do things or operate out of ego? But, it's okay. And I'm not mad about it, because the whole point to that is that I get to make a podcast for you, or I get to put those thoughts onto Instagram, and I get to share these truths with you that I've found, and that actually brings life, a lot of meaning. And isn't that another ego story anyway? If I were to resist that, and I think that sometimes that's where we get when we start to embark on these spiritual journeys. We want to get to that enlightened state. We want what spirituality has to offer us. And so we go about trying to, dissolve the ego and trying to do all these things so that we could get to that highest state. But the truth is, in trying to get there, you're resisting this present moment right now, right? And so it's not about overcoming your ego. It's about being at peace with where it is and noticing yourself as the observer, instead of getting sucked in and thinking that this is it. So as always, I'm going to talk about how this, ego story, or the state that this ego story is born out of, kind of shows up. And then, of course, what we can do about it. So the first thing I have for you, it gets really hard to find gratitude. Think about this. When you're in an argument with somebody that you love, or when you're irritated with someone at work, or you just are having the worst day, you don't have anybody to talk to, or you haven't talked with somebody about this yet, and you're in that space, you're just defensive, frustrated, isolated, you feel powerless. How easy is it for you to find something that you're grateful for? It's so hard, right? First of all, it's not a natural reaction to think of things that you're grateful for when you just feel like the world is against you. So that might be, the problem. You're not even thinking to look for things to be grateful for. But even when, you do think of it, or even if like somebody were to tell you, hey, just think of something that you're grateful for when you're in this space, when you're, down, or just kind of, in that low place, we sort of feel some resistance to having a grateful heart. And so the other side to this is that sometimes when we're feeling alone or irritated or frustrated, or the world's against us, we have one of two options. We can just resist it completely, and we can be like, I'm not grateful. I don't have the capacity for that right now. Or if we see ourselves as spiritually inclined, or we want to see ourselves as grateful people, what you might do is you'll just kind of like give yourself a pep talk, and you'll talk yourself out of not feeling grateful. So you'll be like, oh, it's fine. Look at all these things I have to be grateful for. I just need to focus on the positive. And that is sort of like bypassing. And bypassing just sort of shoves things deeper down, because what we're doing is we're saying it's a way of entering denial. It's a way of, just not recognizing our true state and shining the light over here, instead of seeing what proverbial cobwebs are in the closet and then cleaning them out. So if we force ourselves to be grateful before we're ready, we'll tend to go through the motions of being grateful rather than actually being grateful. And our experience ends up showing up as really shallow. And, I used to do this when I was like, I should have a gratitude practice. And so every morning I would bust out a journal, and I would be like, okay, I'm going to write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And they were all really like, I wasn't feeling it. That's the whole point of having a gratitude practice, is you have to feel it. And it's not just like going through the motions. And so what I would do is I would look at the things that I was grateful for, and I would be like, they were all physical material and directly in front of me. I'm grateful for my pen so I can write. I'm grateful for my coffee, and I'm grateful for my house, And I was having a hard time coming up with all of these things that I was truly grateful for. And I think that the point to having a gratitude practice is not to like bypass those feelings of, when you're in fear and separation and when you are really in like a hard place. It's not to bypass that, but rather it's to realign yourself and to allow yourself to feel fully, and then realizing that you can be grateful even for your experience, right? When you're allowed to feel fully, then you can also be grateful for that experience, however terrible it might have been. So I do recommend starting a gratitude practice on that topic of, having a gratitude journal. If a gratitude journal works for you, great. That's awesome. Then keep doing what works for you. But for me, it's a moment by moment process. There are times where it's the perfect temperature outside, it's the smell of the fresh air, or it's something that, I anticipated being hard but was actually super easy. I anticipated it taking 5 hours and it took 1 hour, or, usually that ends up being with my kids. Like when my kids cooperate, I'm really grateful for that. But it could be just the prospect of doing something exciting, even whether or not that pans out. It's the prospect of doing something exciting that you can still be grateful for that feeling. This actually really hit home to me when my boss came to me the other day and was like, hey, there's this possibility that you could go on this amazing trip, right? And I'm like, that's amazing. I would love that, Whether or not that trip pans out, whether or not that trip actually ever happens, it's still like being excited for the idea that the very real possibility that I could go on that trip. Does that make sense? The more in the moment you are about your gratitude, I think the more effective it is, and it really starts to spiral. So a little bit of gratitude in one area will start to spark gratitude in another. And it's all about noticing. It seems like such a natural process, but it's hard to define and it's hard to put our finger on. And what I would say is it's more so about noticing and honoring basically the universe for giving you what you have. And I always look at it as like, I use the word incredible gift all the time. When I use that word, I don't see my experience as like, oh, okay, I'm thankful. I see it as like actually somebody or something giving that thing to me. Think about it as like just random gifts that show up from somebody who is trying to win you over. That's the way that you need to look at your gratitude, or that's the way that you need to look at things to be grateful for. Just look at it as somebody's trying to win you over. And all of a sudden, when these things start to show up, you're like, oh my gosh, what an incredible gift. And the more you notice, the more these things will show up for you over and over and over again. Okay. The second thing is kind of related to gratitude, but it's difficult for you to notice synchronicities. If you listen to my podcast, you probably know what synchronicities are, but just in case, I'm just going to break it down really quick and give you some examples, because to be honest, when I started on this journey, I really try to talk in plain speak about this kind of stuff, because I don't think that the spiritual community or the access to spiritual ideas should be exclusive or very jargony. I just felt like I needed to, explain sort of what synchronicities are. So they can take many, many shapes and forms and appear to you in many, many different ways. And it is all about what strikes you. So what I mean by that is whatever meaning you give your synchronicity is the meaning that the universe will use to show you something or to grab your attention, right? So they can take the flavor of being at the right place at the right time, and then all of a sudden you meet up with somebody who can help you with your startup business or can help you move to a place that you want to move to. It could be experiencing something that happened in your dream in real life, so like almost having deja vu with your dream, and then all of a sudden it happens in real life. It can be a sign like a bald eagle or a snake or some other, animal, or seeing stars or something like that everywhere you look. It could be repeating numbers on a clock, a license plate, address, a phone number, a check, etc., etc., etc. It could be deja vu. It could be perfect timing. It could be unexpected surprises or incredible gifts, as I was talking about. But synchronicities, I think that most people think of synchronicities as like repeating, like seeing 333 on the clock. That could be it. It could also not be it. It just depends on you. What I would say is that synchronicities are generally a nonverbal message coupled with the feeling that the universe is looking out for you and is on your side. And I have gotten messages about, what does this mean? What is this thing? It keeps appearing to me. What does it mean if I keep seeing this one thing? And what I always tell people is that, like, it's hard because we sort of want to think that there's like an objective, we could look it up in the dictionary and we could be like, well, if I see stars everywhere, then that's what this symbolizes. It's like the same thing when you get dream books, and it's like, if you're seeing the color blue, then that usually points to this or this emotion or this kind of pattern in your life. And the answer is yes and no. And unfortunately, there's no real objective truth. If you see 333 and that reminds you of your family, then that's what it's communicating to you. If you see 444 and that means that luck is on your side, then that's what it means for you. And sometimes it is helpful and fun to look these things up, to be like, well, what does that symbolize? And there's all sorts of places that you can look these things up, but take it at face value. Take it with a grain of salt. And, if it strikes, if it hits home with you, then it could be what the universe is trying to communicate to you. But I would always go to your own heart first. Okay, that's my little rant about synchronicities. Essentially, what I'm trying to say, though, with this is that when you are feeling isolated, separate, or fearful, you will tend to miss these signs, or if you do see these signs, you'll tend to write them off as if they are non-magical or purely coincidental, or they're meaningless. Somebody's not necessarily looking out for you. You're just like, it happened. Probably happens to everybody. It's nothing special. I think that the same thing, I was kind of talking about this, it happens with gratitude, right? It's all about, what do you notice? What do you focus on? There are a million things we can focus on at any given point. And actually, I think that it was Aldous Huxley who was talking about how his theory of the world is that we actually, as human beings, we have the capacity to take in so much. And so our egos, or the lens that we view the world, actually acts as a filtering system in order to filter out the non-necessary, so that we're not bombarded with information at all times. And so think about it that way. We tend to think that, we're already taking in everything that we need to see at any given time. But the truth is that if you just shift your focus, you can look at something completely new that's always been there, and then have a completely different experience because of that. So if you're having a hard time with this one, I would recommend you pray. And that's kind of a hard thing for me to say, because I'm not religious, and actually I left organized religion, and that could be a whole topic for another time. But when I left organized religion, I felt really weird praying, because I always thought that I needed to pray to someone. I always thought that I was praying to the big man upstairs or whatever. And all of a sudden, my belief system in organized religion it had crumbled completely. And it was difficult for me to be like, okay, well, who do I pray to now? What am I asking for? And so I think that sometimes our language around what we use spiritually, that can help us. And so if universe works for you, that works for you. Source, the ever-connected whole, whatever it needs to be, use that language to help shape. Because here's the thing, is that we know that language holds power, a lot of power. This is why we say affirmations. This is why we pray. This is why language can hurt people. It has the power to crush someone or put them in a shame spiral. Language is powerful. And so when when you pray for something, you are sending out an intention, but you're also asking for something. You're connecting with that higher source, that higher power. You're recognizing that even though you feel so alone and separate, that very act of praying itself pulls you out of that fear and separation, because you're able to talk to something that's looking out for you. You're talking to your connected whole. You're talking to this realm that we can't see, but we know is always there. And so that pulls us out of that fear and separation. There was one time that I was leaving for a trip, and I was traveling with kids on my own. And traveling with kids, if you don't know, is very, very exhausting and tiring. And I was feeling a lot of stress and overwhelm, and to the point where I was like, how do I not go on this trip? Can I call and cancel, but plane tickets were already bought, reserved, whatever. I couldn't do it. And I just remember feeling just crushed by my circumstance. Like I couldn't do it. That's how I felt. I felt like I wasn't going to be able to do it. And I remember just sitting on the shower floor praying, like the first time I had prayed in a long time, and asking for a lifeline. I just said, please send me a lifeline. And then I got a call from a guy that was supposed to be picking us up from the airport to take us, like the Uber to take us. But it wasn't the Uber. It wasn't through Uber. It was the driver. He called me to coordinate this ride. And I felt like it's so weird. I felt like the energy seeping through the phone and helping me, positively impacting me. He was so positive. He was so reassuring. He was just happy, just a contagious, happy personality. You know those people that just, they're like a little light, and that's what that did for me. And in that moment of prayer, that's exactly when I was like, this is a synchronicity. This is the universe looking out for me and sending me what I needed when I needed it. And then that translated then into me being grateful as well. So that's what I mean by gratitude and synchronicities. And yes, I do recommend praying. So you have to be grateful when synchronicities show up. Please don't write them off. When you write them off, the universe, it's like they're sending you gifts, and it's not like the universe isn't going to stop. But how are you missing all of this? It's like, if you're missing all of it, it's almost like Christmas is coming and you're like, I didn't like that gift. I didn't like that one either. That one sucked. And meanwhile, you keep looking over to what your sister's getting and you're like, oh, she got something so much better than me, and I'm mad because I didn't get that either. It's just it's such an ungrateful place to be. It's entitled. And when you're entitled and when you're ungrateful, you're doing it to yourself, and things aren't going to unfold for you. Anyway, that's my tough love pep talk, but you have to acknowledge these things. The more you notice, the more the universe sends you. All right. Number 3, and this is my last point, and then next week I'll see you more on relationships, so I'm excited to talk about that. But number 3 is chasing, grasping, and hoarding. I talked a lot about this in my episode on scarcity, and I will link that in the show notes. But the way that this shows up in fear and separation with the fear and separation lens is that we don't really trust that we'll be provided for. If I operate from the belief system that I'm a separate person and I'm the only one who will truly watch out for me, then I start to do things to ensure that I'll be taken care of. And so I sort of am going to go into the survival mode with my physical things, where I start collecting, hoarding, grasping, and I collect and hoard and grasp way more than I ever needed to survive. So we will collect things. We'll use the word just in case a lot to justify our holding on to things. And by the way, when I say just in case, I'm not saying that it's bad to plan for the future. I'm definitely not saying that, but you have to come to this point where you ask yourself, is this still serving me? Would this be better used if it was given to somebody else who needed it a little bit more than me? Another way this shows up is if you'll take things for free, even if you don't want it or need it, because your ego will tell you that you're getting something for nothing, and that feels like winning, and your ego likes to win. You'll have a hard time getting rid of things, even if it's not serving you anymore, and in this way, generosity becomes really inhibited. I don't want to say that it's hard, because I do think that we have this innate part of our souls that are dying to connect with and help people in need, but it's not as natural or as easy or as effortless as it is when we're aligned with spirit, when we don't see the world as separating and isolating. Do you get what I mean? It's easier to be generous when you're in this state of love and connectedness versus fear and separation. When we're looking through this lens of fear and separation, we sort of need a good reason to give our stuff to somebody else in need. Whereas when we're looking through the lens of connectedness and love, we see everything and everyone as equal. We don't see one person as better or worse or, deserving, non-deserving. That kind of stuff just doesn't make sense to spirit, because there's nothing that you can do. It's just life. You're just walking your path, and sometimes you stumble. That doesn't mean that that's bad. And so when we're aligned with spirit, the spirit doesn't think twice about giving somebody something that they need. But the ego will be like, did they deserve it? How do I know that they're not going to take advantage of me? Those are kind of the ego stories, right? And can you see how that's born out of fear and separation? How do I know that I'm not going to be taken advantage of? Or how do I know that that person's not going to, take all my stuff and then leave me with nothing? It's so survivalistic. Another way that this manifests is that you get really protective about the things that you have and almost paranoid that somebody can take it from you. So I did also talk about this in my episode about fear and scarcity when I talked about jealousy and envy. But basically, the ego starts to see our possessions as sort of an extension of us, and so it almost defines us. And so that way we sort of subconsciously think, who would I be without this thing? Because we've attached our happiness, we've attached our self-worth to our house, to our car, to the clothes that we wear, right? We construct this identity around all of our things. And then if somebody were to take away that thing, the ego is like, oh my gosh, no, that thing defines me. That thing, if you take away that thing, you take away me. That's sort of the thought, the subconscious thought process. And really, we have to see our stuff as like, it serves a purpose. It's not an end in itself. Your car is not happiness. The happiness is what happens inside of you. And without the car, you can still be happy. I'm saying car, but whatever it is for you, I just think that that's a big ticket item that a lot of us can maybe identify with. But chances are, I would say that chances are, if you listen to this podcast, you probably are not super attached. Your identity is not super attached to your car. But what is that thing for you? What is that one thing that, like, if somebody were to come take it away from you, who would you be? You can get really deep, and like, if you can come to terms with that, when you come to terms with that kind of stuff, you address all sorts of underlying beliefs, and that is your ticket to freedom. Really, I think at the end of the day, we're just looking for love and connection, and sort of sometimes we can like misplace that love and connection in our thing instead of genuine relationships, or spirituality is your ticket out of that. Because spirituality, when you have this deep realization that you are love, you are connected, you cannot be separated. That's a total illusion that you could possibly be by yourself without help or on an island alone. That there's no possible way to do that. When you realize that, then you stop putting your self-worth into other things that will never fulfill that purpose. It's so shallow, right? It will never fill that purpose. It will never be a supplement for that genuine connection. So anyway, all that to say that yes, fear and separation is where the ego sort of is born from. That's the breeding ground for this inflated sense of self. If I could leave you with something today for the next week, something to do, some actionable step, it would be to start noticing. Start noticing the little things. My husband and I have this little practice where we share our joy moments throughout the day. And they're little moments of joy that you noticed when you were in the moment, that you were like, oh my gosh, that was so great. I enjoyed that conversation. They're the little incredible gifts that come at the most perfect times, but you would never notice them if you don't notice them, if you don't make a point to notice them. They're a conversation. It's, the wind on your face. It's a laugh that you heard from somebody you love. It's genuinely being with people you love. It's a good meal. It's these little teeny tiny things that, make the world of a difference if you notice them, but could easily go unnoticed and you would just take them for granted every day. Okay, you guys, thank you for joining me today. I will see you next week. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time. Hey you guys, thank you so much for sticking around to the very, very end with me. I just have one last announcement for you. If you enjoy these episodes and you would like me to produce them every week instead of every other week, which is something that I would love to do for you, there is a donate link down below. What this helps me do is outsource some of these things that I just don't have that much time for, such as editing and producing this podcast. If you don't know me, I am a mother to 2 very little kids and I have a full-time job already. And your donations really help offset some of the costs that it takes to produce on a weekly basis. Also, if you do not know me, if you have not connected with me, I'm primarily on Instagram at spiritmind.body. I would love to hear from you. My last episode of the season, which will be in April, is going to be a Q&A. So if you have any questions, comments, any way that you'd like to connect with me, please do head over to Instagram or on YouTube. Drop me a comment or a message. I would love to hear from you. Thank you guys. I love you guys so much. I will see you next week.